Xavier Ellison sat in the glass-walled office of his IT company, gazing out the window at the vibrant spring city of Atlanta. At 33, he had his own successful business, a penthouse downtown, and a sports car, everything many dreamed of. But the conversation he'd just had with his father was nagging at him. "You have no idea what it's like to bust your butt for pennies," Elijah Ellison said, his voice husky, as he sat awkwardly on the edge of his son's expensive leather sofa. Elijah was 58. His hands were scarred and battered from a lifetime of heavy labor at the assembly plant, and he wore a faded work jacket. He'd worked his whole life to make sure his son could get an education. "You were born with a silver spoon, Zav, but you forgot where you came from." Xavier felt a familiar clench in his stomach. His father wasn't wrong, but admitting it felt impossible. "I haven't forgotten, Dad. I just built a different life, a different one." Elijah scoffed. "You don't know what real work is." He leaned forward. "I bet you couldn't last a month doing any kind of grunt labor. You'd quit in a week." Xavier's pride flared instantly. "Want to bet?" He stood up from his desk. "1 month. I'll take any job you name." "Sanitation worker," his father replied, without hesitation. "It's spring now. The heat's coming. Try picking up other people's trash for 30 days. Xavier extended his hand. "It's a deal. If I last, you stop lecturing me forever about how soft I am. If I don't, I'll publicly admit you were right." Elijah shook his son's hand, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. The very next day, Xavier signed up with the city's waste management services on the south side of Atlanta. He used a fake ID under the name Xavier Bell. With his connections and money, getting burner identity documents was easy. He couldn't risk anyone recognizing the owner of a successful tech firm in a filthy uniform. The first few days were a true test. Waking up at 5 in the morning when his body was used to sleeping until 10. The stench of dumpsters that seeped into his clothes, skin, and hair. The crushing weight of overstuffed bags he had to heave into the truck. The condescending looks from passers-by who eyed the sanitation crew like they were second-class citizens. By the end of the first week, Xavier was starting to understand his father. Every evening, he returned home completely drained, collapsing onto his couch and falling asleep without even changing. His muscles ached so badly he wanted to howl, but he couldn't quit. He was an Ellison, and Ellisons kept their word. Xavier's partner was Mr. Thomas, a man in his 50s with a kind face and a perpetually jokey demeanor. "First time on a route like this?" he asked on day 1 when Xavier was struggling to lift a heavy bin. "Yeah," Xavier answered honestly. "I used to work in an office. Decided to try something different." Mr. Thomas laughed heartily. "You've got guts. From the office to the back of a garbage truck. That's something." He clapped him on the shoulder. "Don't worry. You'll get the hang of it. Just ignore the way people look at you. We do essential work. The city would drown in its own waste without us." Those words resonated deeply with Xavier. He truly had never stopped to think about who cleaned up his trash, who kept the streets sanitary, who was working while everyone else slept. That first day, Xavier came home feeling completely broken. His hands were shaking with exhaustion, his back throbbed, and the smell of garbage lingered even after he showered. He ordered takeout, but he couldn't eat. He just lay on the sofa, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the insane gamble he'd taken. Day 2 was even worse. Muscles unused to physical strain refused to cooperate. Xavier struggled to lift the heavy cans, and Mr. Thomas waited patiently, never rushing him. "It'll pass in a couple of days, man," he comforted. "The first week, I couldn't even straighten my arms. Thought I was going to die on the job. But look at me now, fresh as a daisy." By day 3, Xavier seriously considered giving up. But then he pictured his father's knowing smirk and clenched his jaw. No, he wouldn't surrender. He would prove he could do it. Day 4 brought a new challenge. On one of the routes, they encountered an overflowing dumpster with shredded garbage bags strewn all around it. The stench was unbearable. Xavier nearly gagged, but he pulled himself together and began collecting the scattered waste by hand. "See that, Bell?" Mr. Thomas said, helping him. "This is the real deal. Not sitting behind a computer in a clean office, but hands in the dirt, sweating it out. But when you go home, you feel like you truly earned your keep." These words struck a chord in Xavier's soul. He had never thought his clean office job could be less valuable than dirty street labor. But now he realized that all work mattered. The people who picked up the garbage deserved just as much respect as those who wrote code or ran corporations. By day 5, Xavier had adapted to the routine. The muscle soreness had dulled, his hands were calloused, and the smells no longer bothered him as much. He learned how to lift heavy items correctly, conserving energy, and he started talking with Mr. Thomas, learning his story. His partner, it turned out, had been a sanitation worker for 20 years. He had 3 children, all grown and moved away. His wife worked as a cook at a school cafeteria. They lived modestly but happily. "The main thing in life isn't how much you earn, Bell, but how you live," Mr. Thomas said during their lunch break. "I've seen rich people miserable as strays, and poor people full of joy. It all depends on what you have inside." Xavier nodded silently, absorbing the simple wisdom. He thought about his own life, the lonely downtown penthouse, the expensive car he drove to an empty office, the money in his account he had nowhere to spend. And suddenly, he realized he was unhappy. He had everything but what truly mattered. Day 6 was especially hot. The May sun beat down relentlessly, heating the asphalt beneath their feet. Xavier and Mr. Thomas drove their route, emptying container after container. Xavier's back ached, and his shirt was plastered to his body with sweat. "Last one for today," Mr. Thomas said, nodding toward a gray dumpster next to an old apartment building. "Let's finish up and head home." Xavier walked up to the container and lifted the lid. The usual mess: garbage bags, cardboard boxes, plastic bottles. He started throwing the contents into the truck when he noticed a small cardboard box at the very bottom. Something inside the box stirred. Xavier's heart froze. Some kind of animal? A cat? A rat? He leaned over the edge of the container, peering into the gloom. Inside the box was something wrapped in soft fabric. Even from there, he could tell the cloth was expensive. Then he heard a sound that flipped his world upside down. A tiny, pitiful squeak. A cry. Not a kitten. A newborn baby. "Oh, God," Xavier whispered. And without a second thought, he climbed inside the dumpster. Mr. Thomas, standing by the truck cab, was looking at his phone, waiting for his partner. Xavier carefully took the box and looked inside. There, wrapped in a luxurious ivory velvet blanket, lay a minuscule infant. She was only a few days old. Her face was wrinkled and red, her fists clenched. On the blanket, he saw an intricately embroidered monogram in gold thread, a graceful letter H. Thoughts raced through Xavier's head. Who would abandon a baby? How did she end up here? What should he do? He knew he had to call the police immediately. That was obvious. But his arms spontaneously pressed the box to his chest. The baby fell silent, as if sensing the warmth of a human body. Xavier glanced around. The courtyard was deserted. Mr. Thomas was still by the truck, his back to him. And Xavier made a decision that changed everything. Quickly, without thinking about the consequences, he hid the box with the baby in a large plastic bag, covering it with old rags lying in the container. He carried the bag out and carefully placed it behind him, leaning it against the truck's tire. "All set, Mr. Thomas. We're done," he shouted, trying to keep his voice steady. Great. Let's go home. I'm wiped out. While his partner climbed into the cab, Xavier grabbed the bag and quickly slipped it into his backpack, which was lying in the truck bed. The baby whimpered quietly again, but the engine noise drowned out the sound. The entire ride back, Xavier was on edge. What had he done? Was this kidnapping? No. He found a child. He didn't snatch her. But why hadn't he reported it? Why did he take her? He didn't know the answer himself. Instinct, impulse. Fear that if he left her there, or reported it officially, she would be absorbed into the system, or worse, that the person who threw her out would come back to finish the job. After his shift, Xavier quickly said goodbye to Mr. Thomas and hailed a taxi, clutching the backpack to his chest. The driver was saying something, but Xavier didn't hear a word. Only one thought spun in his head. What have I done? Back at his condo, he carefully took out the box. The baby was sleeping, her face smooth, her breathing even. Xavier gently unwrapped the blanket. It was a girl. Aside from a diaper, she was wearing a tiny pink sleeper, and the blanket was a genuine hand-stitched work of art. This wasn't a desperate, poor mother abandoning her child. This was something else. Xavier didn't sleep at all that night. The baby woke up an hour after he brought her home, crying loudly, demandingly, desperately. Xavier had no idea what to do with an infant. He paced his penthouse, trying to soothe her. He rocked her, hummed something incoherent, and stroked her back. Nothing worked. Then it clicked. She was hungry. He had to rush to a 24-hour supermarket for formula, bottles, and diapers. The clerk looked at him with curiosity. A man frantically tossing newborn supplies into a basket at 3 a.m, but stayed silent. At home, Xavier struggled with the bottle, reading instructions on the internet. Finally, he mixed the formula, tested the temperature, and offered it to the tiny mouth. The girl latched onto the nipple greedily. Relief washed over Xavier. He had done the right thing. While she ate, he examined the blanket closely. The H monogram was expertly and professionally embroidered. The material was genuine, high-quality velvet. Items like this cost tens of thousands of dollars. Who makes such things for infants? Only the most affluent families. Xavier opened his laptop and started searching for information. Maybe someone was already panicking about a missing child. But there was nothing in the news. No reports of kidnapping, no missing persons alerts. Strange. Very strange. He made a makeshift nest for the girl in his bed, surrounding her with pillows. He sat beside her, watching her sleep. So tiny, so defenseless. Who could throw her out like garbage? The next morning, it was clear. He wouldn't go to work. He couldn't leave a newborn alone. Xavier called Mr. Thomas and lied, saying he was sick. A fever, body aches, a bad flu. Get well soon, Belle, his partner said sympathetically. The work will still be here. Xavier hung up, knowing his bet with his father was compromised. But it didn't matter now. A child's life was worth more than any bet. The day passed in a blur. Xavier bought a crib, a bathtub, clothes, and toys. He transformed his bachelor pad into something resembling a nursery. He learned to change diapers, feed on schedule, and rock her to sleep. It was harder than running a corporation. Between feedings, he researched online, reading articles on newborn care, the ideal room temperature, how often to change diapers. It was an entirely new world he knew nothing about. The girl cried often, hungry, wet, or just needing to be held. Xavier picked her up, held her to his chest, and she calmed down. He felt her warmth, heard her breathing, and realized he was growing attached. This was no longer just a foundling. This was a human being who depended on him. Around noon, Xavier decided to bathe her. He drew warm water in the tub, laid a soft towel on the bottom, carefully undressed the infant, and lowered her into the water. She kicked her legs, but didn't cry. In fact, she seemed to enjoy it. "There you go. Good girl," Xavier murmured, gently pouring warm water over her. "That's my sweet girl." After the bath, he wrapped her in a soft towel, dried her, and put on a clean diaper and the tiny onesie he had bought that morning. The girl lay peacefully, looking up at him with wide eyes. "What's your real name?" Xavier asked aloud. "Who are your parents? Why did they abandon you?" There was no answer, of course, just quiet snuffling and the wave of a tiny hand. That evening, when the girl finally fell asleep after a feeding, Xavier turned on the news again and froze. Breaking news. An infant was missing from the home of the well-known multimillionaire Marcus Holloway. The girl had vanished 2 nights ago under mysterious circumstances. The police had launched an investigation. All possibilities, including kidnapping, were being considered. The family was offering a generous reward for any information. A photograph flashed on the screen. Happy parents holding a newborn. Marcus Holloway, a distinguished man in his 40s with a strong face. Next to him, his wife, Aisha Holloway, an elegant woman. And in her arms, Xavier went cold. It was her, the same baby in the same blanket, who was now sleeping in his condo. He rushed to the crib, grabbed the blanket. Holloway, of course. How had he not figured it out immediately? Panic. True panic seized Xavier. He was harboring the daughter of a multimillionaire, a child the entire city police force was looking for. He would be accused of kidnapping, locked up. His life would be ruined. He had to return the girl immediately. Anonymously, take her to the police station, and then run, or drop her off at the Holloway's gated estate. But Xavier looked again at the sleeping infant. If he just dropped her off, the police would wonder how she returned. They would question everyone and check surveillance cameras. He might be found out. And if he told the truth, that he found her in a dumpster, who would believe him? They'd think he was a kidnapper who fabricated a story. No, he had to think. He had to understand the situation before acting. Xavier opened his laptop and started searching for information on the Holloways. Marcus Holloway, owner of a major construction company. Fortune estimated in the hundreds of millions of dollars. His wife, Aisha Holloway, a stay-at-home mother, active in the social scene. Their daughter was born a week ago in an exclusive birthing suite at a major medical center. The Holloways employed a full staff: a chef, housekeepers, groundskeepers, security, and a nanny for the baby. Xavier dug deeper. He found several interviews with Marcus and photos from events. In one of them, taken a month ago at a charity gala, Marcus stood next to his pregnant wife, and slightly further away was a young woman in an expensive gown, looking at the millionaire with a specific gaze, the mistress. Xavier zoomed in on the photo. Beautiful, polished, around 30. The caption read, Marcus Holloway, with his wife Aisha, and his assistant, Celeste Dubois. Assistant. Xavier continued his search and stumbled upon a piece on a gossip blog published 6 months ago. It claimed Marcus was having an affair with Celeste Dubois, but the millionaire had vehemently denied it, threatening to sue for slander. Interesting, very interesting. If Marcus had a mistress and his wife gave birth to a child, the motive was clear: jealousy, revenge. But how could the mistress kidnap a child from a secured estate? She didn't live there. Xavier thought about it. Who lived there? The staff, the people they trusted. He opened the news again. One report showed the Holloway estate and included an interview with the lead investigator. In the shot, a young woman in a dark suit flashed by. She was introduced as Brielle Dubois, the baby's nanny. Xavier looked closely. Something about her face seemed familiar. He went back to the photo of Celeste Dubois and carefully compared the features. They were similar, very similar. Sisters. Adrenaline surged. If Marcus's mistress had successfully embedded her sister as the nanny in the home, this was no longer just a theory. It was a real lead. Xavier frantically searched for information about Brielle, social media, public records, everything he could find, and he found it. A closed social media page, but the profile picture showed two girls hugging. One was Celeste Dubois, the other was Brielle, the nanny. The caption read, "With my favorite sister. Bingo deal." Now Xavier understood. Returning to his sanitation job was impossible. He had a kidnapped baby in his care who needed constant attention. The bet with his father was meaningless in the face of what was happening. He spent a sleepless night pondering his next move. Every hour, he got up, checked if the girl was breathing, if she was warm enough. He changed her diaper. When she woke up, he fed her warm formula, holding her in his arms and whispering comforting words. By morning, Xavier made a decision. He couldn't just return the child. He first had to find out who was responsible, or the girl would be in danger again. The following days, Xavier was in a feverish state between caring for the infant, whom he decided to call Grace for the time being, and investigating. He had to hire a nanny, an older woman named Mrs. Clara. He introduced himself as a single father working 2 jobs. He paid her 3 times the usual rate to avoid unwanted questions. Mrs. Clara turned out to be tactful and experienced. She cared for the girl with motherly tenderness, never asking why the baby had no mother or why her employer was so nervous. "The main thing is the little one is healthy," she'd say, rocking the girl. "The rest is none of my business. Everyone is entitled to their secrets." Xavier was grateful for her silent understanding. Mrs. Clara came every morning at 7 and stayed until evening, giving Xavier time to pursue his investigation. He called Waste Management Services and said he was seriously ill, needing sick leave. He promised to bring a doctor's note, but it hardly mattered anymore. His tech company continued to operate without him. His deputy handled things, and Xavier only occasionally gave instructions by phone, pretending to be ill. His father called every day. "Xav, how are you? Should I come over?" "No need, Dad. It's a flu. A contagious virus. I don't want to risk it. Come on. I'm solid as a rock. No bug can touch me." "Seriously, Dad, don't. I'm fine." Elijah sighed, but didn't press. Xavier felt the lie growing heavier in his soul, but he couldn't tell the truth yet. He had to figure things out first. He grew more attached to the baby with each passing day. The realization struck him suddenly one evening when she woke up crying and he picked her up. The girl instantly quieted, snuggling her nose into his shoulder. And something inside him shifted. This wasn't just a foundling. This was a tiny person he had rescued, who trusted him, who recognized his scent and voice. He couldn't bring himself to stop calling her Grace. He knew it was wrong, that she had a real name and real parents. But while she was with him, she was his Grace. In the evenings, after Mrs. Clara left, Xavier would sit by the crib for hours, watching the sleeping infant. He read her articles from the internet, the news, and talked to her about his day. The girl didn't understand the words, but she seemed to respond to the sound of his voice, calming when he spoke. The investigation progressed. Xavier successfully hacked Brielle's social media page. His programmer skills came in handy. He found a direct message exchange with her sister, Celeste. They were cautious, writing in hints, but some things were clear. Everything is going according to plan, Brielle wrote 3 days before the baby disappeared. Good job. You'll get your money soon, Celeste replied. I'm scared. What if something goes wrong? Don't be afraid, Brielle. Your only job is to hand her over. The rest isn't your concern. What if they suspect me? They won't. You've only been there 2 weeks. No one knows anything. Do exactly as we planned. The correspondence cut off there. They were likely communicating in person or by phone. These hints weren't enough for the police. He needed concrete evidence. Xavier knew he had to dig deeper. He started researching Brielle's background. He found out that before working for the Holloways, she had indeed worked at a daycare. The recommendations were excellent. Teachers spoke highly of her. Parents thanked her for caring for their children. Brielle looked like the perfect nanny candidate. But one detail alarmed Xavier. Brielle had suddenly quit the daycare 3 weeks before she started working for the Holloways. The official reason was family circumstances. But what circumstances exactly? Xavier continued his search and found an interesting piece of information. Around the same time, Celeste Dubois had posted on a gossip site about the world's unfairness and people who don't value real feelings. The post had been deleted hours later, but Xavier found it in the cache. This meant Marcus must have broken up with her then, returning to his family, and Celeste decided to seek revenge. Everything clicked into a logical picture, but evidence was still missing. Xavier decided to hire a private investigator. He introduced himself as a journalist writing an exposé on the kidnapping of children from the wealthy. The detective's name was Ray Work, a former cop, smart and experienced. He met Xavier in a small, cramped office on the outskirts of town. You don't look like a journalist, Rourke said, sizing up Xavier. I write for online publications, Xavier lied. I want to do a deep dive investigation into the help the Holloways hired, especially the nanny. Rourke squinted. She was the first person they checked. Clean. Maybe they didn't check well enough. And maybe you're not a journalist? The detective smirked. All right, not my problem. Are you paying? Xavier laid down a thick wad of bills. This is a retainer. Find something solid, and you get triple this. Rourke counted the money and nodded. I'll get on it. Xavier left the office feeling hopeful. Now he had a professional who might find what the police had missed. The days dragged by agonizingly. Xavier watched the news. Marcus Holloway was on TV every day, pleading for his daughter's return, offering a huge reward, addressing the kidnappers directly. I'll pay any money you ask, the millionaire said, his voice cracking. Just bring my child back. She's done nothing wrong. Next to him, Aisha was weeping. She looked 10 years older than she had a week ago, her face gaunt, her eyes wet from tears. And standing behind her was Brielle, with a cold, almost indifferent face. Xavier saw the apathy and felt a rush of rage. This woman stole a baby, threw her out like trash, and now stood next to the grief-stricken parents, feigning sympathy. 5 days later, Rourke called. I've got something interesting. Let's meet. At the office, the detective laid out a folder of documents. Brielle Dubois, 32 years old. Sister of Celeste Dubois, Holloway's mistress, confirmed by witnesses. The affair lasted a year, ending right before Aisha's pregnancy. Motive, Rourke whispered. Yes, but that's not all. Brielle has a brother, Darius Dubois, 40 years old, an alcoholic, prior arrests for petty theft. Lives alone in a rented apartment in a run-down part of town. And here's the kicker. Rourke pulled out a bank statement. The day before the baby disappeared, $5,000 was deposited into Darius's account from Brielle. Goosebumps ran down Xavier's spine. She paid her brother to dispose of the child, Rourke finished. According to my intel, she asked him to drive out to the woods and leave her, but Darius, being a drunk, probably blew the money and decided to take the easy way out. He threw her in the dumpster, Xavier concluded. Exactly. I checked cameras near that apartment building. 2 hours before the baby went missing, Darius's gray car stopped there. The license plate matches. Everything lines up perfectly. I have one more thing. Rourke pulled out a USB drive. I put a bug in Darius's apartment. Listen to this recording from 2 nights ago. He played the audio. A drunken voice was bragging. $5,000 for 10 minutes of work. Allie thought I was going to drive out to the woods, but I'm smarter. Tossed the box in the can, and that was that. No loose ends. A second, also intoxicated, voice laughed. Lucky you, Darius. I'd do anything for that kind of cash. Aw, man, Darius continued. I didn't kill anybody, just dumped a box. Who's going to go looking in there? The garbage truck will bury it by the end of the day. End of story. Xavier listened, and a chill went through him. This man threw a newborn on me into the track, fully aware she might die, and he was laughing about it, boasting about the easy money. Can we use this? He asked, barely controlling his rage. The recording's illegal. It won't hold up in court, Rourke shrugged. But it's enough for the police to start investigating. They'll have cause to question Darius, check his car, seize his phone. He'll crack under pressure. Guys like him always do. Question is, who hands over the information? I will, Xavier said firmly. Then be ready to answer questions. Lots of them. You'll have to explain where you got this information and why you didn't report the discovery immediately. I'm ready, Xavier nodded. But first, I need to talk to my father. Xavier thanked Rourke and left the office. He now held all the cards. The hardest part remained, going to the police and telling the truth. Xavier sat in his condo, looking at the sleeping Grace. Tomorrow he would go to the police, hand over all the material Rourke had gathered, and tell them how he found the girl. And then the real hell would begin. He would be accused of withholding information, perhaps even of aiding and abetting. He would have to explain why he didn't immediately report the discovery, why he took the child home, why he launched his own investigation instead of contacting the authorities. But there was no alternative. If he just dropped the girl off and disappeared, the guilty parties would go unpunished. Brielle would remain the nanny and might make another attempt on the child's life. Darius would spend his cash on liquor, Celeste would weave new schemes, and Grace would return to her parents. But the threat would still linger nearby. No, he had to do things properly. Xavier spent his last evening alone with the girl. Mrs. Clara had left after dinner, leaving them to themselves. He fed Grace, bathed her, and changed her into clean pajamas. Then he rocked her in his arms for a long time, singing a lullaby his mother had once sung to him. The girl looked at him with wide eyes, blinking occasionally. It was as if she sensed that something was changing, that they would soon be separated. I'm sorry, little one, Xavier whispered, holding her close. I can't keep you. You have real parents who love and are looking for you. They'll take better care of you than I can. They'll give you everything you need. Grace yawned and nudged her nose into his arm. Xavier felt tears well up. I'm going to miss you, he confessed. You know, I never thought I could get so attached to someone in just a few days. But you're special. You changed my life. He laid her in the crib, covered her with the soft blanket, and stood by her, listening to her steady breathing. Then he picked up his phone and called his father. Dad, I need your help, he said when Elijah answered. What's wrong, son? Come over early tomorrow morning. And don't ask any questions. Just come. Xavier, you're scaring me. I'll explain everything tomorrow, I promise. Dad, this is important. Very important. Elijah was silent for a moment, then quietly said, All right, son. I'll be there. What time? 7 o'clock. And thank you, Dad. Anytime, Xav, always. Xavier hung up and went back to the crib. Grace was sleeping peacefully, snuffling quietly, so small, so vulnerable. In a few hours, she would return to her parents, grow up in wealth and love. She would forget these days spent in a stranger's apartment, but he would remember. Always. In the morning, his father knocked at the door exactly at 7. Xavier opened it and silently led him into the room. Elijah froze when he saw the baby crib, the toys, the bottles on the table. My God, Xav, do you have a child? Not mine. Xavier walked over to the crib and carefully picked up Grace. Dad, have you heard about the kidnapping of the Holloway's daughter? Of course. That's all the city talks about. What does that have to do with... Elijah broke off, staring at the infant in his son's arms. That's her, he whispered. Oh my God, Xav, what have you done? I found her. Xavier gently laid the girl back down. On the 6th day of my sanitation job, in a dumpster, someone threw her away like trash. He told him everything. About the discovery, the panic, the decision to take the baby, the investigation, Celeste and Darius, the detective, and the evidence. He spoke for a long time, missing no details. His father listened silently, his face shifting from shock to horror, and from horror to understanding. You saved her life, Elijah said when Xavier finished. If you had left her in that trash bin, God, I don't even want to think about it. She could have been crushed by garbage, frozen, starved to death. But I didn't report it right away. They might charge me with kidnapping. No. Elijah shook his head firmly. You found a child and saved her. And then you figured out who was guilty. That's not a crime, son. That's heroism. Real heroism. I'm scared, Dad. Scared that it will all go wrong. That they won't believe me. Elijah walked over to his son and hugged him. Listen to me, Xavier. I am proud of you. Do you hear me? Proud. You did something not everyone is capable of. You risked yourself, your reputation, your well-being for a tiny human being. That means everything. And our bet? Xavier asked, feeling his throat tighten. Elijah chuckled. What in the hell about our bet? You worked sanitation for 6 days and found a baby. Saved her life. That's more important than any argument or wager. Consider yourself the winner. By a mile. I will never again say you are soft, because you are a real man. My son. Xavier embraced his father. For the first time in years, he hugged him genuinely, tightly, without shame, and felt his father return the embrace, patting his back. Thank you, Dad, he whispered. You're welcome, son. Now let's go. We have work to do. An hour later, they packed up Grace's things, took all the detective's materials, and headed to the police precinct. Xavier carried the girl in his arms, holding her close. She woke up on the way, but didn't cry, lying calmly, occasionally clenching and unclenching her fists. At the precinct, they were met with caution. The desk officer called the lead investigator on the kidnapping case. Xavier and Elia sat in the hallway, waiting. People walked by, looking curiously at the man holding the infant. Finally, the investigator emerged. Sergeant Reynolds, a man in his 50s. He looked at Xavier, then at the baby, and something in his gaze changed. Please come into the office, he said quietly. Inside, Sergeant Reynolds motioned for them to sit. Xavier sat down, holding Grace. Elijah sat beside him, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. Silent support. Start talking, the sergeant said, opening his notepad. And Xavier told the whole story from the beginning. The bet with his father, the sanitation job, finding the baby in the dumpster, the fear he would be accused of kidnapping, how he cared for her, how attached he became, the investigation, Celeste and Darius, the detective. Sergeant Reynolds listened in silence, making occasional notes. When Xavier finished, the investigator took the girl, examined her, and checked the blanket with the monogram. It's her, he said quietly, his voice trembling. The Holloway's daughter. We've been searching the whole city. We thought she was dead. Xavier handed him the folder with the materials. Here's everything we found. Brielle Dubois, the sister of Marcus Holloway's mistress, was working as the nanny. She paid her brother, Darius, $5,000 to dispose of the child in the woods, but he threw her in the dumpster instead. Here are the bank statements, the recording of his admission. Everything. Sergeant Reynolds flipped through the documents. His face grew harder and harder. Where did you get this? I hired a private investigator. I couldn't just return the girl while the culprits were free. She would return to her parents. But what if Brielle tried something again? The sergeant was silent for a long time, looking first at Xavier, then at the sleeping infant in his arms. You violated the law, he finally said slowly. You should have reported the discovery immediately. That's withholding information, possibly kidnapping, albeit with unusual circumstances. Xavier nodded, bracing for the worst. But Sergeant Reynolds continued, You saved this child's life. If you hadn't taken her from that dumpster, she would have died. He put the girl on the desk, holding her gently, and picked up the phone. Plus, you provided the information that will help us find the real criminals. That's a mitigating circumstance. A very mitigating one. I'm going to call my superiors. Given all the circumstances, I think the action against you will be limited to a warning. An administrative violation, not a criminal case? Xavier exhaled with relief. Next to him, his father squeezed his shoulder. Everything will be fine. Can I say goodbye to her? Xavier asked when the sergeant finished his call. Sergeant Reynolds silently handed him the baby. Xavier took Grace in his arms, holding her close one last time, inhaling her scent, milk, baby powder, and something else, elusive and precious. He kissed her forehead and her tiny fingers. Be happy, little one, he whispered. Go back to your mom and dad. Live a long and happy life. And I will always remember you. The girl opened her eyes, looked at him, and smiled that gummy, newborn smile that makes your heart melt. Xavier felt tears stream down his cheeks, but didn't hide them. Goodbye, Grace, he whispered, and handed her back to the sergeant. Reynolds took the child carefully, and Xavier saw that the sergeant's eyes were also damp. You're a good man, the investigator said. Thank you. Xavier just nodded, unable to speak. The police acted quickly. Darius Dubois was arrested that same day. They found him in his apartment, sleeping off another bender. At first, he denied everything, shouting he knew nothing. But when they played the recording of his own admission, Darius's face went gray. I didn't mean any harm, he mumbled, as he was led away in handcuffs. Allie said the baby wasn't wanted anyway. I just wanted the money. I had debts. They were threatening me. You threw a newborn baby into a trash dumpster, Sergeant Reynolds said coldly. And you have the audacity to make excuses? I thought they'd find her quickly. Honestly. Silence, Reynolds snapped. Take him away. They came for Brielle at work. She was at the Holloway estate, pretending to be heartbroken over the baby's disappearance. Aisha Holloway sat in the living room, pale and drawn. Marcus paced the room, unable to settle. When the officers entered the mansion, Brielle was coming down the stairs. Seeing the police, she grew uneasy. "Did you find anything? Any news about the little one?" "Yes," Sergeant Reynolds replied, entering behind the officers. "Brielle Dubois, you are under arrest on suspicion of the kidnapping and attempted murder of Mr. and Mrs. Holloway's infant daughter." Brielle's face turned chalk white. She backed away, clutching the railing. "What? No, I'm not guilty of anything. I'm searching for her too." "Your brother Darius confessed," the sergeant said calmly. "He told us how you paid him $5,000 to get rid of the child. He told us where he dumped her. That's not true. Darius is lying. He's an alcoholic. He'd say anything. We have a bank transfer to his account. From your account, the day before the child disappeared. We also have a message exchange with your sister, Celeste Dubois, where you discuss the plan, where she promises to pay you when everything is over." Brielle was silent. Her eyes darted around, searching for an escape. Aisha Holloway slowly rose from the sofa. She walked up to the nanny she had trusted with her most precious possession. She looked her in the eye. "How could you?" she whispered. "I trusted you. I let you into my home, allowed you to hold my daughter. And you?" Her voice broke. Marcus walked over and put his arms around his wife's shoulders. "Where is she?" he asked hoarsely. "Is she alive?" "The child has been found," Reynolds answered. "She is alive and well. She is undergoing examination at the hospital now. You can take her home today." Aisha sobbed, clinging to her husband. Marcus stood, embracing her, tears streaming down his own cheeks. Brielle was led out in handcuffs. She walked with her head bowed, no longer attempting to justify herself. Celeste Dubois was arrested that same evening. She was in her apartment, getting ready to go out, likely to a social event. When the police knocked on the door, Celeste opened it with a smile, expecting someone else. "Celeste Dubois?" the officer asked. "Yes, that's me. What's this about?" "You are under arrest on suspicion of organizing the kidnapping of an infant." The smile vanished from Celeste's face. She tried to slam the door, but the officers were quicker. She was restrained, handcuffed, and led to the car. At the precinct, Celeste remained haughty, refusing to answer questions, demanding a lawyer. But the evidence was irrefutable. The messages with Brielle, witness accounts of the affair with Marcus, and the motive of revenge. "You orchestrated the child's kidnapping to take revenge on your former lover," Sergeant Reynolds said during her interrogation. "You embedded your sister in the home as the nanny. You planned everything down to the last detail." "Prove it," Celeste replied coldly. "We will. Your sister is already testifying. She's telling us how you persuaded her and how much you promised to pay. Your plan was simple. Get rid of the baby, then comfort the grief-stricken Marcus, and lure him back into your web. The only problem is your plan failed," the sergeant continued. "The child was found, alive and well. And now you will answer for your actions." The news that the child was found alive and the culprits arrested spread through Atlanta like wildfire. Television channels showed footage of the Holloways picking up their daughter from the hospital. Aisha held the girl, crying with joy. Marcus embraced his wife and child, unable to hold back his own tears. Journalists surrounded them, bombarding them with questions. "Marcus Holloway, tell us how you feel." "Happy," the millionaire replied, his voice rough. "Just boundless happiness. I thought I had lost my daughter forever. We both did. And now she is with us. Alive, healthy, unharmed. Is it true that a simple sanitation worker found the child?" "Yes. His name is Xavier Ellison. He didn't just find her, he saved my daughter's life. He took her from a dumpster where she could have died. He cared for her and found the guilty parties. This man is a real hero." Marcus looked directly into the camera. "Xavier, if you see this, thank you. A huge, immense thank you. You gave me everything back. I am forever in your debt." Xavier watched the broadcast at home with his father. Elijah Ellison placed his hand on his son's shoulder. "See that, son? It all ended well. The girl is home, the criminals are arrested, and you're a hero." "I'm not a hero, Dad." Xavier shook his head. "I just did what I had to do." "That is exactly what makes you a hero," Elijah smiled. The next day, the investigator called Xavier. He informed him that no criminal charges would be filed. Given that Xavier saved the child's life and provided information that helped find the real criminals, the investigator had decided to limit the action to a verbal reprimand for not reporting the found child in a timely manner. "But," the investigator added, "this is an exceptional case. In the future, if you find yourself in a similar situation, you must immediately contact the police." "I absolutely will," Xavier promised. "Thank you." He hung up and breathed a sigh of relief. The nightmare was over. Grace was home with her parents. The guilty were arrested, and he was free. But he felt a heaviness in his heart. Xavier missed the girl, her quiet snuffling, the way her tiny hand would grasp his finger, the way she calmed when he held her. "It will pass," his father said. "You'll get used to it. The main thing is, she's alive and happy." "I know, Dad. It's just strange. Only a few days, and I got attached, like she was my own daughter. Because you saved her. And when you save a life, you are forever connected to that person." 2 days later, there was a knock at Xavier's door. Marcus Holloway stood on the threshold. Just a man in an ordinary suit. "May I come in?" he asked. Xavier silently stepped aside. Marcus walked into the living room, looking around. The room still held traces of the infant's stay, the crib in the corner, the toys on the shelves. "You cared for her here?" the millionaire said softly. "The sergeant told us. He said you hired a sitter, bought everything necessary, cared for her as if she were your own." "I couldn't have done anything else," Xavier shrugged. Marcus turned to him. His eyes were red, his face tired. It was clear the last few days had been a living hell for him. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice breaking. "Thank you for saving my daughter. You risked everything. Your reputation, your freedom. You could have been a suspect. But you weren't afraid. You found the true culprits and returned my most precious possession." He extended his hand to Xavier, who noticed it was trembling. "I am in your debt. A massive debt. If you need anything at all, just ask. Money, a job, help, whatever you want." Xavier shook the extended hand. "I don't need anything. The main thing is that the girl is safe and happy." "She is safe. We fired all the old staff, hired new people, vetted and with recommendations. Security has been tripled. Cameras installed all over the house. Nothing like this will ever happen again. Ever." The millionaire paused, then added, "My wife wants to meet you, to thank you personally. We both do. If you don't mind, of course, we'd like to invite you over for lunch tomorrow, so you can see that Anya is all right, and so we can say thank you properly." Finally, Xavier knew his Grace's real name was Anya. He wanted to refuse. Seeing the girl would be painful. He knew that. But something in Marcus Holloway's eyes, the genuine gratitude and hope, made him nod. "All right, I'll come." Marcus exhaled with relief. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll send a car tomorrow at 2 o'clock. "No need," I'll drive myself. As you wish. I'll text you the address. Marcus pulled out a business card, wrote the address on the back, and handed it to Xavier. Then he shook his hand one more time and left. Xavier stood in the hallway holding the card. Tomorrow he would see Grace, Anya, one last time to truly say goodbye and let go. The Holloway's house was a huge, sprawling estate in an exclusive Atlanta neighborhood. A high fence, wrought iron gates with cameras, and a manicured garden. The security guard checked Xavier's ID, cross-referenced it with a list, and opened the entry gates. Xavier parked near the fountain in front of the main entrance and got out of his car. His hands were shaking slightly. He didn't know what awaited him, how he would react to seeing the girl. He missed her incredibly, but he understood she was no longer his. She never had been. Marcus opened the door himself, dressed casually, without ceremony. His face was relaxed, a spark back in his eyes. The return of his daughter had clearly brought him back to life. Xavier, please, come in. We're waiting for you. Xavier walked into the spacious foyer. Marble floor, crystal chandelier, a wide staircase leading to the second floor. The wealth, which would have impressed him before, now seemed insignificant. The main thing was elsewhere. In the living room, Aisha Holloway was sitting on the sofa, an elegant, beautiful woman in her 40s, with kind but tired eyes. She held the girl in her arms. Seeing Xavier, Aisha stood up and walked toward him. Her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "Thank you for my daughter. Marcus and I, we had lost all hope. We thought we would never see her again. And you gave us everything back." She held out the girl to him. "Take her. Hold her. I'm sure she recognizes you." Xavier carefully took the infant in his arms. The girl looked at him, and he could have sworn recognition flickered in her eyes. She smiled that same gummy smile and reached a hand toward his face. "Hello, little one," Xavier whispered, holding her close. "God, I missed you." "She remembers you," Aisha said quietly, wiping her tears. "Sergeant Reynolds told us you cared for her like a true father. You fed her, rocked her, didn't sleep at night, hired a sitter, bought everything necessary." "I just did what was necessary," Xavier replied, not taking his eyes off the baby. "I couldn't leave her alone." "You didn't just save her life." Marcus walked up to his wife, putting his arms around her shoulders. "You saved our family, our future." He paused. Then his voice grew husky. "Xavier, I have to confess something. What happened is entirely my fault. I was an idiot. I cheated on my wife with Celeste. I thought it meant nothing, just a fling, an intrigue, and she used it to take revenge. Through my daughter, through my child." The millionaire's voice cracked. "When Anya disappeared, I realized I had lost everything. Not just my daughter, but everything. My family, love, the meaning of life. Aisha was going to leave me. She said she couldn't live with a man who had betrayed her and then endangered their child because of his foolishness." Marcus knelt before his wife, taking her hands in his, and Xavier saw them trembling. "Forgive me, Aisha. Forgive me for everything. For the betrayal, for the pain, for the fact that because of my stupidity, our daughter could have died. I was blind, selfish, and thoughtless. But I swear, never again. It will never happen again. You and Anya are everything I have, everything I need." Aisha cried, stroking her husband's head. "I forgave you, Marcus. The moment you took Anya in your arms at the hospital, and I saw you crying, I knew you were truly remorseful. And I want to give us a second chance. For our daughter. For us." Marcus stood up, embracing his wife and child. They stood, pressed against each other, and Xavier felt like an outsider in this scene of reconciliation. But he understood. He was the one who had given this family a second chance. He had not only returned the child, but also revealed the truth that allowed them to start over. He carefully handed the baby back to Aisha and stepped back. "I'm glad you're together, and that everything ended well. Thanks to you." Marcus extended his hand. "Xavier, I want you to know you are not just the savior of our daughter. You are a friend to our family. Forever. You can always count on us." Xavier shook the millionaire's hand, feeling the sincerity in his words. Lunch passed in a warm, almost familial atmosphere. The Holloways asked Xavier about his life, his work, his family. He told them about his tech company, the bet with his father, and the 6 days he worked sanitation. "Those days changed me," Xavier admitted. "I never thought about the people who pick up our trash, who clean the streets, who do the dirty work. To me, they were invisible. But it turns out they do the most vital work, and I didn't appreciate many things in my life." "That's a lesson for all of us," Marcus nodded. "I also didn't appreciate a lot of things. My wife, my family, the simple joys. I chased thrills, something illusory, and almost lost the most important thing. Now every day, I thank fate for giving me a second chance." After lunch, Aisha asked Xavier to stay a little longer. Marcus went into the garden, leaving them alone. "Xavier," she began, rocking her daughter, "I want to ask you something. Marcus and I discussed it, and we both agree. You became part of our daughter's story, the most important part. You saved her. You cared for her. You became attached to, and we want you to remain in her life." "I don't understand." Xavier looked at her, confused. "We want to ask you to be her godfather." Aisha smiled through tears. "When it's time to baptize her, we want you to hold her in your arms, to take spiritual responsibility for her, because you have already proven you are willing to do anything for her." Xavier felt a lump in his throat. Godfather. He hadn't even considered it. He hadn't dared to hope he could remain in the girl's life. "I would be honored," he choked out. "That's a huge honor for me." "No," Aisha shook her head. "The honor is ours. You saved our daughter, returned her to us alive and well. We are forever in your debt, and we want you to be nearby, to see her grow up, so she knows who she owes her life to." She handed him the baby. "Hold her a little longer, while it's the three of us." Xavier took the girl, holding her close. She snuffled, occasionally twitching in her sleep. So tiny, warm, and alive. He had saved her, and now he would be a part of her life. "Thank you," he whispered, addressing Aisha. "Thank you for letting me be close." "Thank you," she replied, "for everything." They sat in silence, listening to the quiet breathing of the infant. The sun shone in the window, and birds chirped in the garden. Life went on. A new, bright life, filled with hope and love. When Xavier left, Marcus walked him to his car. "Come by often," he said. "We'd love that. We really would." "I promise," Xavier replied. "I'll visit you, and the little one." He got into his car and looked back at the estate. Aisha stood in the second-floor window, holding the baby. She waved to him. Xavier waved back and drove away. On the way home, he thought about how strangely life worked. A foolish bet with his father led him to sanitation work. Sanitation work led to finding a baby. Finding a baby led to a new family, to people who had become dear to him. His father was waiting for him at home. Elijah Ellison was sitting in the kitchen drinking tea. "Well, how was it?" he asked when Xavier walked in. "Good, Dad. They asked me to be Anya's godfather." "Her name is Anya." Elijah grinned widely. "See? I told you. You're a hero. A real hero." "Stop it." Xavier poured himself a cup of tea and sat down opposite him. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Many people happen to be there, but not everyone does the right thing. You did, and that means everything. They sat in silence, sipping their tea. Then Elijah said, I'm proud of you, son. Very proud. Xavier looked at his father and smiled. Thank you, Dad. For everything. For pushing me into that bet. For being there when things were tough. And for not judging me. I'll always be here, Zav. Always. The trial of Celeste, Brielle, and Darius Dubois took place 2 months later. Xavier attended the proceedings as the key witness. His father sat beside him, offering support. The courtroom was packed on journalists, the defendants' relatives, and curious onlookers. The Holloways sat in the front row holding hands. Aisha was pale, but composed. Marcus looked at the defendants with unconcealed hatred. Celeste Dubois refused to testify, sitting with a haughty expression, unresponsive to questions. Her lawyer tried to argue there was no direct evidence, but the messages with Brielle and witness accounts of the motive were damning enough. Brielle remained cold and detached, sitting at the defense table with a stone face, refusing to admit guilt. Her lawyer tried to argue she acted under pressure from her sister, that she was coerced and didn't understand the consequences. But the evidence was overwhelming. The bank transfer, the messages with Celeste, Darius's testimony, which detailed how his sister asked him to dispose of the child, how she paid him $5,000, and how she explained the infant wasn't wanted. Darius, in contrast, was remorseful. He cried in the courtroom, begging the Holloways for forgiveness, swearing he hadn't intended to kill the baby. I didn't mean to, he kept sobbing. Honestly, I didn't. I just thought they'd find her quickly, that someone would hear her cry. I didn't think she could die. You threw a newborn girl into a trash dumpster, the judge said coldly. In May, when the nights are still cold, without food, without warmth, where she could have died from hypothermia, starvation, or being crushed by trash. And you say you didn't intend to kill her. Darius was silent, his head down. His lawyer tried to appeal to the defendant's alcoholism and difficult financial situation, but it failed to impress the judge or the jury. When Xavier was called, he took the witness stand, recounting how he found the child, took her home, and cared for her. He explained why he hadn't immediately contacted the police. He feared accusations and wanted to fully understand the situation, ensuring the girl would return to safety. I knew I was breaking the law, he said firmly, but saving a child's life and finding the guilty parties was more important. If I had simply handed her over to the police without investigating, Brielle Dubois might have remained free and the girl would have been in danger again. The judge listened carefully, occasionally nodding. You risked yourself, she noted. You could have been a kidnapping suspect. I knew that, but the risk was justified. After Xavier's testimony, Marcus Holloway was called. The millionaire stood up, approached the stand, and spoke calmly, but with suppressed pain in his voice. My daughter could have died, he said. Because of my foolishness, because of my thoughtlessness. I cheated on my wife, had an affair, without thinking about the consequences. And it nearly cost my child her life. I am guilty. But the people sitting at the defense table are even more guilty. They used an innocent infant as a tool for revenge, discarding her like trash. And if it weren't for Xavier Ellison, who was in the right place at the right time, my daughter would be dead. He turned to Celeste, Brielle, and Darius. I cannot forgive you. Never. But I am grateful to fate that you failed to carry out your plan, and that people like Xavier exist who don't ignore the misfortune of others. The sentence was severe. Brielle received 15 years in prison for kidnapping and attempted murder of a minor. Darius received 12 years for aiding and abetting and attempted murder. The court acknowledged his remorse, but it only slightly mitigated the punishment. Celeste, as the crime's organizer and a person acting out of revenge, received 18 years. When the verdict was read, Aisha quietly cried with relief. Marcus hugged her, pulling her close. Xavier, sitting next to his father, felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It was over. Justice had been served. 6 months passed. I've settled into a new routine. Xavier continued to run his company, but something inside him had changed forever. He no longer chased profit just for profit's sake. He started noticing people, those who had been invisible to him before. The office cleaner, whom he had never noticed, now had a name, Ms. Brenda. Xavier learned she had 3 grandchildren and was helping her daughter raise them because her son-in-law had left the family. He raised her salary and paid for the grandchildren's extracurricular activities. The courier, Nick, who was once just a guy who delivered packages, became a real person, a student working to pay for college. Xavier helped him with documents to receive financial aid. The security guard at the entrance, the drivers, the cleaning crew, everyone stopped being faceless figures and became people with names, stories, problems, and joys. Xavier understood that those few days working sanitation and the story of the baby had opened his eyes. His father was prouder of him than ever. Now you're a real man, Elijah Ellison would say when they met on weekends. Not someone who just makes money and builds a career, but someone who can see people, value them, and help them. Thanks for the lesson, Dad. What lesson? Elijah chuckled. I just wanted to teach you a lesson. Show you that life is harder than you think. And you went and found a baby, saved a life, became a hero. It wasn't me who taught you, it was life. Xavier visited the Holloways often. He came on weekends and spent time with Anya. The girl was growing up, becoming increasingly cute. When he arrived, she would joyfully stretch out her arms and smile. She remembers you, Aisha would say with a smile, and she loves you. Look how happy she is when you visit. Marcus and Aisha had fully reconciled. The millionaire kept his word, not a single glance toward other women. He fully devoted himself to his family. He came home earlier, spent evenings with his wife and daughter, and went on family outings. You know, Xavier, Marcus said one day as they sat on the estate's terrace, watching Aisha walk with Anya in a stroller on the lawn. I used to think happiness was money, power, success. I built an empire, bought expensive things, had affairs. I thought that filled life with meaning. And then I almost lost everything because of my own blindness. You didn't lose it. Xavier took a sip of coffee. You got a second chance. Use it right. I'm trying. Every day. I'm trying. Aisha forgave me. But I know trust isn't restored instantly. It takes time. I have to prove it with actions, not words. Marcus paused, then added, Before, when my daughter disappeared, I was truly in a bad place. Not just bad, I was terrified. Aisha shut down, said she didn't want to see me anymore, that everything that happened was my fault. And she was right. Marcus's voice trembled. And I thought everything I had built, the money, the business, the connections, was worthless without my family. I sat in the house and thought, you're a millionaire. You have everything, but you don't have your daughter anymore. You almost don't have your wife. You have no purpose. What was it all for? Xavier was silent, allowing him to vent. I was going to end it all, Marcus confessed quietly. Seriously thought about it. I got out a gun and sat with it for hours. I thought, If Grace is dead, if Aisha leaves me, why live? He wiped his eyes. But then the police called. They said the child was found, alive and well, and I couldn't believe it. I fell to my knees and cried like a baby, with happiness, with relief, with gratitude. A second chance. They gave me a second chance. Xavier put his hand on his shoulder. And you're using it right. I see how you've changed, how much closer you and Aisha have become. That's the main thing. Thanks to you, Marcus looked at him. You didn't just save my daughter. You saved me, my family, my soul, if you want. I will never forget that. Anya's christening took place 9 months after her birth. Xavier stood in the church, holding the girl, feeling an incredible responsibility and joy simultaneously. The priest performed the rite, reciting prayers. Now christened Anya received the second name, Grace. She lay calmly in her godfather's arms, not even crying when she was dipped into the font 3 times. Xavier looked at her serious little face and thought about the journey they had taken together. From a trash dumpster to a church, from despair to hope, from darkness to light. After the ceremony, there was a small reception at the Holloway estate. Only close relatives attended. Aisha's parents, a few family friends, and Elijah Ellison, whom Marcus insisted on inviting. Your son is a hero, the millionaire said, shaking the working man's hand. He saved my daughter, gave me back my family. I want you to know we will never forget this. Never. Elijah felt slightly embarrassed. He's just a good man. That's how I raised him. To never ignore someone else's trouble. To help the weak. To be a real man. And you did a fantastic job. Aisha walked over to them, with her daughter in her arms. Xavier is a remarkable person. Kind, brave, honest, and now he's part of our family. Forever. That evening, after the guests left, Xavier stayed to help clean up. Marcus stopped him. Leave it. The staff will handle it. Come, let's talk. They walked out into the garden. It was a warm autumn evening. Leaves rustled underfoot. Somewhere in the distance, they heard the chirping of birds gathering before their migration. I want to offer you something, Marcus began. I know you have your own company, your own business. Everything is going well. But if you ever want to collaborate, to expand, my doors are always open. I'd be happy to work with someone I can completely trust. Thank you. Xavier nodded. I'll think about it. It might be a good idea. And one more thing. Marcus stopped and turned to Xavier. I want you to know, if you ever need help, any help at all, reach out. Money, connections, anything. To us, you're not just Anya's godfather. You're a brother, a member of the family. Xavier felt his throat tighten. He had come to this house as a child's rescuer and found a true family, people who had become dear to him as kin. Thank you, Marcus, for all of this. Thank you, the millionaire hugged him, for existing, for giving us a second chance. Another year passed. Anya Grace turned 2 years old. She had grown into a charming little girl with big eyes and an infectious laugh. She spoke many words, ran everywhere, and constantly explored the world around her. Xavier was dating a woman named Naomi, smart, kind, and beautiful. They met at one of the charity events Xavier now regularly attended. Naomi volunteered at a children's home, helping abandoned children find families. When Xavier told her the story of how he found Anya Grace, Naomi cried. You're amazing, she said, wiping her tears. I just couldn't have done anything else, Xavier replied. They started seeing each other more often. Xavier introduced Naomi to the Holloways, and Aisha immediately took a liking to her. She's a keeper, she told Xavier when they were alone in the kitchen. Hold on to her. Girls like that are rare. I am, Xavier smiled. Anya Grace loved Naomi too. She would run to her with open arms, call her Auntie Naomi, and try to get her to play with dolls. You two will have wonderful children, Marcus remarked one day, watching Naomi push his daughter on the swing in the garden. I see how she is with kids. Motherly instinct. Xavier blushed. It's too early to talk about that. Why? Marcus smirked. You're in your 30s. She's 28. It's the perfect time to think about family. Don't make my mistakes. Don't wait until life forces you to reassess your priorities. Marcus was right. 3 months later, Xavier proposed to Naomi. Without pretense, simply and sincerely, on the same terrace at the Holloway estate where they so often spent evenings together. Marry me, he said, offering the ring. I want to spend my whole life with you, raise children, grow old together, be happy. Naomi cried and nodded. Yes, 1,000 times, yes. The wedding was small but intimate, attended only by close friends and relatives. Elijah Ellison was immensely proud of his son, barely holding back tears. The Holloways also attended with their daughter. After the ceremony, there was a small banquet at a restaurant. Marcus toasted Xavier and Naomi to love that conquers all, to the happiness they deserve. Everyone raised their glasses. Xavier hugged his wife, and they blew out the candles on the cake together. The guests applauded, and little Anya Grace cheered the loudest, clapping her hands. That evening, after the guests left, Xavier stood on the balcony of the presidential suite with Naomi holding her shoulders. The night city spread out below them. Millions of lights twinkled in the darkness. Happy? She asked, leaning into him. Immeasurably, he answered. I have everything. A loving wife, friends who became family, a goddaughter I love like my own, a father who is proud of me, work that brings joy. What else is needed for happiness? Your own kids? Naomi asked softly. Do you want them? Xavier looked at her. Of course I want them. I want everything with you. Children, grandchildren, a long life together. She smiled mysteriously. Then I have news for you. We are going to be parents. I found out 2 days ago, but I wanted to tell you after the wedding. Xavier froze, not believing his ears. Then he spun her around in his arms, laughing with joy. Seriously? We're going to be parents? Absolutely serious. In 7 months, you'll be a dad. He pulled her to him, burying his face in her hair. Happiness overwhelmed him in the life that began with a foolish bet and led to sanitation work, to finding a baby in a dumpster, was now giving him a loving wife, a child on the way, and a true family. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you, Naomi replied. The best man in the world. They stood, embracing, watching the stars. Somewhere, in one of the city's apartments, little Anya Grace was sleeping. The girl Xavier had saved 2 years ago, the one who changed his life forever, who taught him the most important thing, to never ignore someone else's pain, to value people, and to love truly. Another year passed. Xavier and Naomi had a son. They named him Elias, after his grandfather. Elijah Ellison cried with happiness, holding his grandson. Now the circle is complete, he said. I raised you, and you're raising him. I know he'll be as good a man as his father. Xavier often brought his son to the Holloways. Anya Grace adored little Eli. She played with him, telling him stories in her childish voice. They'll grow up together, Aisha said, watching the children. Like brother and sister, let them grow, Xavier nodded. Let them know what true friendship and love are. One evening, while Xavier was sitting at home with his son in his arms, the phone rang. It was Marcus. Xavier, turn on the news, he said, agitated. Xavier turned on the television. The screen showed a report about a sanitation worker in another city who had found an abandoned infant in a dumpster and saved her life. See that? Marcus's voice was trembling. People don't ignore it. Your story repeated itself. Xavier looked at the screen, tears welling up in his eyes. A week later, he was invited to a television program discussing the issue of abandoned children. Xavier agreed, even though he disliked publicity. In the studio, he was greeted as a hero. The host asked questions, and he answered honestly and simply. How did you feel when you found the baby? Shock, fear, but mostly a desire to save her. You can't walk past tragedy. What do you want to say to those who might find themselves in a similar situation? Xavier looked into the camera. Don't walk past. If you see trouble, act. A human life is the most valuable thing in the world, especially a child's life. After the broadcast, he received hundreds of comments. People thanked him, shared their own stories. Some recounted how they had also rescued abandoned children. Others simply said thank you for setting an example. Xavier read them and understood that his story had a continuation, not just in him, but in dozens, hundreds of other people who would also refuse to ignore someone else's distress. 7 years passed since the day Xavier found Anya Grace. She turned 7 and started school. A smart, cheerful, kind girl. On her birthday, Xavier came with his family. Eli, who was already 5, ran ahead, waving a gift. Anya, look what I brought you. Anya Grace hugged him. My favorite Eli. They ran off to play, and the adults sat down at the table. Marcus raised his glass. Friends, today is my daughter's birthday. But for me, it is also a day of gratitude. 7 years ago, Xavier saved her life. And since then, our families have become one. I want to drink to friendship, to love, and to the fact that we are all here together. Everyone clinked glasses. Xavier looked at Naomi, at his son, at the Holloways, at his father. His family was large, loud, and happy. That evening, after the children were asleep, Xavier went out into the garden. Marcus joined him. They stood silently, listening to the night sounds of the garden. Then Marcus said, Thank you, Xavier, for everything. Thank you, Xavier replied, for taking me into your family. They hugged like brothers. And in that embrace was all the gratitude, all the love, all the friendship that bound them forever. Xavier's story began with a simple bet and a desire to prove his strength to his father, but it turned into something much greater. Saving a life, finding a family, and understanding true values. He learned to see the people he had previously ignored. He learned not to walk past another person's tragedy. He learned to love and be loved. And little Anya Grace grew up to be a wonderful girl who knew she had loving parents. And she also had a godfather who once saved her, pulling her from a trash dumpster and giving her a life full of love and happiness. Did you like my story? If you listened till the end, drop a number 1 in the comments. If you enjoyed it, you can support me by liking the video and sending a small tip. I've got lots of other life stories like this on my channel, so make sure to subscribe and check them out. I've added 2 new stories on screen that everyone loves. Thanks for being here. See you in the next one. With love.